What's up YouTube, Dale here from Zephyr War Games, and today I am bringing you another update to DarkWorld, this time with a different normal summon engine. Now after a lot of deliberation and conversation with Team Flapsky on YouTube, I kind of went through all of the different normal summon options, and as you can see by the spoiler here, we have decided to go for the Invoked engine and see how it works in place of Tour Guide. So this is going to be the full deck list, and then if you want to see some test time combos with this deck, make sure you smash that like button and get it above 50 likes in the first 24 hours, and I'll be more than happy to do so. With all of that out of the way, let's dive headfirst into the profile. I'll explain the choices, and I'll also show you some alternative options as well. So, as has been very standard in most of the DarkWorld builds, we are going with triple Rainbow alongside triple Grapha, triple Genta, and you should pretty much know where this is going from now. Triple Snow, and then what I've changed up, I've actually gone for one Silver and one Cerulli. Now, the reason I've gone with these ratios right here is I've tried to change it up a bit. I did want to put one gold in as well, and it would probably be gold in place of Cerulli, just to be a bit more aggressive and pop more cards on the field, which can be really, really important in regards to stuff like floodgates or just general stuff that might cause you issues, because there's ways of getting gold to the graveyard through your opponent's effects with the fusion monster. Now, the reason I cut Silver down was just general space. I wanted to play around with it and see how it works at 1. Because I'm not going for a hand loop like direct version, there are ways of looping Silver back to the hand. Like the way of being able to bounce Rainbow and then Grapha is absolutely insane. And that's where you've got to be careful with the Invoked engine, is kind of making sure that you don't banish, like you're not going to be banishing any of your darks. Apart from Alistair, the only light you're really going to be banishing is the Artemis from the extra deck, and then from that point on, you're then relying on your opponent's light monsters to get the second Macabre, or of course you banish the first Macabre in the graveyard, but you should only really need one, just to kind of get the job done. Everything else, as I've said before, we max out on freeze just because they are that important. They're the cogs that keep the deck going. The rest of the spots like Brow, Cerulli, Silver, Gold, they're all down to the type or the version that you are playing. Like I said, I've kind of tried to test this out. Like I've been using Silver at 2 for so long. I've had one version with Cerulli and one version without it, and there's just been times where I haven't seen it, or when I have seen it, like you need to kind of maximize the value on it. And when you can see the value of it is usually when you're going first. With this lineup, the only two cards you want to be discarding off of Cerulli are Silver and Rainbow, or Rainbow, because everything else, like Snow, brings back from their graveyard. So unless they've hand trapped you already, you're not really bringing anything back that's going to give you mass value. Genta doesn't really have a value, so yeah, you kind of just play around with it, which is why I think maybe even Cerulli could come out for the gold. It does just come down to player preference on this one. Carrying on, I still play the 2 Salamander. Now, the reason I play this is because the way I look at it is it's a controlled danger. So when you're trying to compare the danger lineup, if you were to count the Salamander as one, you've ended up going for 2, 4, 6, 8, 11. So you've got like 11 danger targets in theory if you count the Salamander. If you wanted to as well, Salamander could be your 5 for Purgatrio, but to make Purgatrio as consistent as possible, you probably go the Almirage and the Light Cyverse target as well. So, Gravity, I think it's Gravity Controller, sorry. No, it's not, it's the Secretary. I haven't played that version in a vote for a long, long time. But anyway, you can see the lineup of dangers, again, all pretty standard on these ones. Like Chupacabra, you don't really want to be activating to discard unless you hit Bigfoot. I have considered Mothman as well, and the reason Mothman isn't in here is because I'm not going rank 4 heavy. Like I only play a couple of rank 4 options, and even then they're not desperate options. Like they all have specific moments in the game and specific matchups to be used, otherwise you're not going to use those rank 4s, and I'll explain them when we get to the extra deck. The one thing that I would like to consider is like a rank 7, and the reason for that is throughout testing, when I was playing Nessie, I also, of course, spoiler, if you don't have these, do not worry, it's not the end of the world. I do play triple Fenrir. Now, there were so many times where I was activating Fenrir, special summoning Fenrir, searching out a second copy of Self, activating Nessie, summoning the Nessie, and I was like, oh, I can make a rank 7 here. But there isn't really any rank 7s that you're like, yo, this is game ender, or like this is a really good version of itself. So like Mind Hack is probably the most effective right now, just to look at someone's extra deck. So that is possible if you wanted to put him in, but I felt that they were better off, or Nessie was definitely better off being used as a material and Fenrir left on the board as a form of interruption. So again, this lot is all pretty straightforward and standard to the most high-end competitive DarkWorld decks. And I've pretty much played this same ratio from start to finish. The only thing that really changes is the level 8 dangers. Obviously, I went with Ogre Pogo, 1 Thunderbird, and 2 Bigfoot. And the reason for 2 Bigfoot and everything else is that 1s is for the pure fact that Bigfoot is probably, if you're going second, the most effective danger. Because it's like, apart from your opponent holding back a set card, most of their stuff will be face up on the field. Like, it's very rare that they're going to be leaving stuff set. Depending on your locals, you will then adapt this deck, because like I've said, I've had conversation with people and they're like, yeah, I've played sprites, I've played runics and everything like that, and I'm okay, alright, well, I don't see runics being as heavily involved this format, but I could be completely wrong, and that it depends on how people are feeling when D-Shifter and everything else, D-Fissure and Shifter. The last monster, of course, is Zephyros the Elite. So this is just a great target to be discarded. It does help rank 4s, but then what you're using it for is to bounce the danger back to the hand and then get to go again. So for the Invoked engine, we are playing triple Alistair alongside double Invocation and a single Meltdown. Now, I did go back and forth between 1 and 2 Meltdowns, 2 Meltdowns with a Terraforming, you name it. And ultimately what I settled on is I was like, I have more utility of actually hard opening Alistair than I do the Meltdown. Now, I'll explain that as we go. So, I can Allure of Darkness this. So if I activate a danger and I discard the Invocation, I can actually activate a Lure, banish an Alistair, and then Invocation loop the Alistair back to the hand. So that's one little loop round. On top of that as well, a normal summon Alistair is going to do near enough the same thing as Meltdown. Obviously, you'd rather have Meltdown to go, cool, Meltdown, get interrupted, I've already opened up Alistair, normal summon Alistair, still do my own thing. But each part of this engine, if it doesn't successfully resolve, you lose hand advantage for your dangers and everything else. So you've got to be very, very careful. Now, in regards to the normal summon effect and capability of this deck, or this kind of engine in comparison to the Tour Guide engine, it pretty much does the same thing, but rather than getting you to a Neko Main King, it gets you to a Macabre. Now, like, the more and more I think about it, apart from the Garnet, like, you could probably consider these Invocations to be just as much of a Garnet as a Sangan. Like, if you hard open Neko Main King, you're like, cool, great, as long as I don't discard it for danger, I'm in a good zone. Whereas with this, you would go Meltdown replaces by Alistair, normal summon Alistair replaces itself with an Invocation, activate the Invocation after you've turned Alistair into Artemis, go into Macabre, and then banish the activate the Invocation to go back to deck to reset the Alistair. So basically, you get a Macabre for free. This whole engine replaces itself, which is pretty much what Tour Guide does, but it puts a card in your hand that you don't really want to discard. Whereas with this, after you've already resolved the Alistair, you're like, I really don't care. If it gets discarded, cool. If it doesn't, then I've got another normal summon to follow up the next turn, or I go into Sarudra, and it's a card that I can easily put back. The only risk that you do run is by putting the Invocation back into the deck, you're in a little bit of trouble. But keep in mind as well, Invocation is a generic fusion spell, so Invocation can actually be used to make the Grepher fusion, but it will just banish from the graveyard. But it can also send them from the hand to the grave as well. Meltdown is good because it will also protect the Ascension from being negated, which is really, really important because it will protect all of those fusions. And yeah, your opponent can't respond with the fusion effects, which is really, really cool. So you can kind of, the idea is that you want to end your board on something like a Macabre plus, so one card gets you Macabre, and then off the back of that, through your danger plays and everything else, you should be getting into the Grepher fusion, and then a couple of link monsters as well, so you just build up your board from there. So that's it for pretty much the new engine. Everything else I'm just going to blitz through now quickly because it's pretty much the same. So double gates, standard, double allure. Double trade-in, I'm still kind of considering this. It's just a really good go second card. If you open this with either Thunderbird or Bigfoot, you guarantee you're going to get a pop, and you can also end up getting your Graphers or your rainbows into the graveyard. but it's kind of one of them ones where if you wanted to and you're like, yo, I really don't want to play a 45 card deck, I want to get it as low as possible, then you cut this out. It's just one of them ones that sits on the cusp of the edge. And then we've got 2 Ascension and then 1 Archives. I think this is all pretty standard. I've never really been in a position where like, I want 2 Archives. You kind of want to keep your spell count at minimum, and then you kind of contradict that by going with Meltdown and 2 Invocations. I did consider 1 Invocation as well, but then I kind of thought, well, if I was to activate a danger, what I'm thinking worst case scenario, activate a danger and I've got an Invocation in hand but I've got nothing else. I discard the Invocation and draw into an Alistar, like, until I can get that Alistar banished, whether that be through Ascension, whether that be through Allure of Darkness, I can't access my entire Invoked engine. Whereas if I open up, worst case scenario, I open up 2 Invocations, I'm only ever going to be able to discard 1 unless I resolve multiple dangers, and if I resolve multiple dangers, I should be in a better position to keep everything moving forward. So that's just kind of how I looked on it. So that's it for all of the main deck. Moving on to the extra deck. So I went with, and I'm just going to go with the Invoked kind of card-related cards first. So we went with the 1 Artemis, the Moon Maiden. This was just to keep the extra deck count at a minimum, because I'll show you a little stack of cards that I've got to the side of me that are all other options you can add to this as well. I went with the 2 Macabre. Now the reason I went with 2 instead of 1 is it was like, well, if a normal summon Alistar do its job, unless I'm able to spin back the Macabre, I can't resolve it again. It's just like, that's it, it's done. So, whereas with Tour Guide, you could, if you played Brow, resolve it a second time, or it could even, like, you just get another one out of the board. So, a normal summon of that would still get me the same kind of result. Whereas going this way, it's a lot more difficult. So, I went with 1 and 1. Obviously, if you wanted to add in a Purgatrio, then you would need to add in a Fire, which would be Almirage, which is definitely doable. But the issue is, when you see the rest of this extra deck, it was very tough to kind of cut cards down. So there are a couple of alternatives that will show you or I'll show you some alternatives of where I kind of went with. I feel that having 3 rank 4s is a little bit too much. But like I said, all of the rank 4s serve a purpose. So Abyss Dweller in the Mirror matchup, or of course any matchup that utilises the graveyard. In a Flunder matchup, completely dead. But I would then go for Baguska. Baguska is a great option if you get D-shifted and you can't build your board. Then of course you've got Daguerreo's. Now Daguerreo's isn't the best of option to interrupt your opponent, but it is the best of options to make and then activate by drawing and discarding, because then that will trigger more of your dangers, your Dark Worlds, to keep your plays going. So the first one on the list, in my opinion, would be Daguerreo's. And then after that, it would then be, right, okay, well, is my local swarming with Tears or Flunders or Shifters or anything like that? And then you kind of go, all right, well, maybe I could side one of these out or not even play it. So it gives you the option if you want to. This is the safest route to cover all your bases if you're undefined of what's being played at locals. Muckracker I still think is really, really important. But, again, on the flip side, could arguably be cut. Obviously, IP into Unicorn is just a nice little form of interruption. Another card that IP can go into is Underworld of the Goddess, which I think is really, really good as well, because not a lot of people are expecting it. They might expect it more and more if this deck gains more popularity, but it's just a nice one to kind of, you can put so many monsters on the board quite easily, and your opponent's like, he's putting them all in defense. I'm really not worried about it. Like, he'll go into Saruja, or she will go into a Saruja, and then I'll negate it then. And then you surprise them by going, right, okay, link my 4 in your monster and go into Underworld Goddess, and they're like, ah, crap. So I thought it was a nice little surprise factor. Appaloosa and Saruja. So the reason we've gone with this is my aggressors are coming from the main deck. Invoked, Macabre, and Grapha. Keep in mind that Alistair can boost both of these. So again, it gives it a nice little power overhaul. Now, the cards I took out to kind of fund space for this, or cards that are alternative options, is you got the Coach King. Now, the reason I've cut this out is because it was very rare that I was actually making this. Very, very rare, because it was harder to get the level 8s on the board because I wasn't specifically focusing on doing that. Like I said, I wanted to balance the deck. I wanted to be able to get to Macabre, I want to be able to get to Grapha, I want to be able to get to a rank 4 when I want to, and a rank 8 when I want to. But because this requires 3 level 8s, it's a lot more difficult to get there. You have to go out of your way in order to do so. Which is why I've ended up cutting it for what you see there. Another one is Zelantis. So the Zelantis combo is actually really, really cool. So the way it works is you make World Sea Dragon Zelantis first, and then you make Muckracker. You then use Muckracker's effect, discard, lock you into Fiends. And then what you do is you use Zelantis' effect to banish the entire board. When you do that, on resolution to bring back as many monsters as possible, because it's you special summoning, unless your opponent is playing Fiends, you don't actually, or apparently, you are not able to bring your opponent's monsters back. Because it's your card effect resolving to bring them back, not your opponent, you're locked into Fiends, so you can't special summon anything back to the board apart from Fiends. So apparently that's how it works. It's a cool little combo. I've never actually resolved it, but it is an option. Obviously, access code. Access code is probably a little bit better in this version because you've got a guaranteed light and you've got guaranteed dark, so you'll definitely be going through. But again, I wasn't really utilising it to its max potential because to get the most attack, I'd need to go through Unicorn, or I would go through like Sarudra into Zelantis and try and use it that way. But again, I just kind of had to go out of the way to make it as effective as possible. Cross Sheet will be really good if you want to go rank 4 turbo, because obviously it will only bring back a level 4 or lower. So it can be utilised off the back of Macabre and Grapha, but because I wasn't going rank 4 turbo, it just didn't really serve a purpose in here. Akashic Magician, I actually really like this card in this deck now. Now, I've been playing around with it quite a lot. I just couldn't really figure the space in this version. But what was really nice is if my opponent access coded me but couldn't kill me, I could make this to his own access code points to and bounce it. Really funny. But then also on top of that, the best utility is you point it to an opponent's monster and point it to a danger, and then you bounce both to the hand and you get to go again. So it's like an extra deck Zephyros, the Elite, which is really kind of cool. But again, I couldn't find the space to guarantee fitting it in here, bar cutting something like Muckracker or swapping out one of the rank 4s. And the last one is the Dark Charmer. Obviously, this is going to be more effective if I was playing Access Code Climb. So because I wasn't playing Access Code Climb, this card came out quite easily. And then, of course, you've got, like I said, Purgatrio, the Secure Gardener, plus the Almirage as well. So just trying to find those spaces for that. Now, if I was to do that, you'd probably swap out a Macabre for Purgatrio, so you've got the aggression and the defense. Artemis would become the Secure Gardener, and then you would need to find a space, probably be one of the rank 4s or Muckracker that becomes the Almirage to kind of cover all of those bases as well. Anyway, I hope this has given you a good idea on the normal summon engine for this deck. It's kind of interesting to see what other alternatives there are for this deck, and I'm just constantly keep playing around with normal summons. Like I've been asked about Trance Archfiend, I've been asked about the Fabled Raven, and obviously the Tour Guide engine, everything like that. So I'm playing around between all of them to kind of see where I get the most value from, what I think is the most effective normal summon of everything combined, and just kind of working it around that way. So I will continue to test, I will continue to play around, and I will continue to see where we can go with this deck. But for now, thank you so much for watching. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, share. Any questions at all, by all means, please put them in the comments down below. I'll be more than happy to answer them for you. But with all of that out of the way, as absolutely always, guys, stay safe, and of course, happy dueling.